Hello and welcome to another edition of the Front Page. My name's Andrew McKeever. I'm the managing editor of the Manchester Journal, and I'll be your host today. And today it's my pleasure to have with us two guests here in the studios down at GNAT TV. And we'll be talking a little bit about a topic that's become kind of an interesting issue for many of us here in the area, marketing Manchester. Recently at Manchester's town meeting, as many of you know, an appropriation was made as part of the budget to include some money for that purpose. So for that, we have Mr. Ron Mancini, who's a local businessman and is going to be the co-chair of the committee that will be directing that. And we also have with us Pauline Moore, who's the municipal assessor of Manchester and also the town's economic development officer, and has been working along the lines of economic development in Manchester for, well, about a year or so now, right? At this
Almost
point.
two, actually.
More like two.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, let's get right into it. Ron, let's start with you. This Marketing Manchester initiative that you proposed at town meeting and were successful at persuading a majority of the folks there at the floor meeting to endorse. Tell us a little bit about it. What are some of the goals and purposes, and kind of what gave you the idea that made it seem like an idea that his time had come?
Well, the idea for it came actually out of the economic development work of Lee Crone, along with Pauline, in their task, of course, which she'll speak to, is economic development in a broader scale as it applies to Manchester. And Pauline and Lee approached the chamber about a year and a half ago, asking if the chamber would assist with the creation of an office called SCORE, which is a volunteer advisory service to businesses. And it's kind of under the umbrella of the SBA. But the point was that it was at their suggestion in that in their research for providing an economically beneficial climate and trying to attract new businesses to Manchester. And I don't want to take all your thunder away, but there was the decision was made that we should really invest in our existing business base. And that would be a very cost-effective way of improving the economic climate. So the marketing initiative really was born out of that notion of investing dollars into marketing Manchester, improving its economic base, while at the same time, by doing that, we could dovetail into Pauline's work of attracting new businesses down the road.
So this is about more than just attracting new tourists or new shoppers or folks coming to stay at some of the lodging establishments. It goes beyond that sort of thing, I gather.
It does, but it is primarily all of what you just said. It is attracting our visitors. You know, we're a destination resort community. Tourism has been our principal industry for over 150 years. And, you know, we have so many assets in this community to offer to our visiting public. And tourism has also been essentially the gateway as to how many of us ended up coming to Manchester. Whether we came as a visitor and then liked what we saw, came back as a visit again, and became a frequent visitor who then decided to buy a second home or decided to retire here. So many people have come through that tourism gateway that it just makes good economic sense to make some marketing initiatives in that regard to remind people of who we are, all the wonderful assets that we have, our recreation assets, our education assets, and just our beautiful downtown, our village. So just getting that word out. And the other part of it is, why should the town do it? Because after all, we have individual businesses like ourselves who market our own business. We have a Chamber of Commerce, which is a great organization in town that represents not only Manchester, but 17 other towns in the area. And they're in the business of marketing. The discussion with the select board centered around using local option tax dollars that are collected by the businesses in Manchester. It's a 1% tax that's added on to meals, rooms, alcohol, and sales.
And that's where your $16,000 budget is coming from.
That's where it's coming from. It's not coming from the general fund. It actually came out of the reserve fund that the select board set up years ago, where there's excess monies collected from local option taxes were put into a reserve fund so that when on those years where the local option taxes weren't sufficient to meet the operating budget of the town, not the education budget, not the school budget, but the operating budget of the town, then the town select board could then draw from that reserve to make sure that the taxpayers in Manchester weren't adversely impacted by the peaks and valleys
Right.
of an economy.
And by that, they kept the tax rate like the 16th lowest in the state.
Correct.
So
yeah.
they've managed to keep the municipal tax rate really low.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and we get a lot of services for, we're a town of 4,300. When you compare us to other towns of similar size, we have so much more. We have a great police force. We've got this great infrastructure. There's a real focus on the part of the select board and town government to make sure that infrastructure is up to snuff. So a lot of money gets reinvested back into the community with those tax dollars. Mm-hmm. But the important thing is that when the decision was made, and why it's relevant to use some of this money for marketing, when the decision was made back in the 90s to institute a local option tax, it was at that point that the town essentially transitioned from being a community that was taking care of itself and was relying on its property tax base to do all of that work. It now was dependent also on the economic success of the business community. So now every resident, every person who pays property taxes in the town of Manchester is tied to the economic success of the community at levels that they never would have thought they were before.
And still may not recognize
that,
right.
absolutely. Yeah. But we are, and when you think that 25% of our revenue for the town budget comes from local option taxes, you can imagine if that local option tax wasn't there, that all our property taxes would increase by that 25%. Right. And every property tax owner, whether they're a resident, a second homeowner, or a commercial property owner, all benefits from that. Mm-hmm. So we're tied to the economic success of the community.
Now, $16,000 is a nice little chunk of money, but it doesn't strike me as being like a kind of enough money to kind of really make a big dent in getting the word out about Manchester, to kind of go with that shorthand. I mean, what will you be using that $16,000 for? Is it all marketing, like social media, advertising, or things like that, or is there some other ideas that you've gotten?
Well, let me address the $16,000 first. The initial suggestion to the select board was to take 10% of the local option tax money and put it into an aggressive marketing initiative. Mm-hmm. That would have been over $100,000, which would have been, and the select board, I think, wisely said that's too much of a shock to the system. So with that, the proposal then back to the select board was, why don't we phase this in at the rate of about 2% a year for 5 years? So 2%, the 16,000 is not quite 2%, but it's a start. Mm-hmm. And if we do the job correctly and we show a good return, we expect that the 2% will become 4% in year 2, 6% in year 3, until we get to the 5th year where we would feel comfortable using 10% of the local option tax.
But so far, what you
marketing.
have available will just be 1 year's $16,000 for 1 year, and then you'll have to come back at some point next fall or
to discuss it
to see if they want to go for the larger amount. Okay.
Now, what we've built into the proposal is that not only phasing in the local option tax at 2%, growing at 2% a year each year for 5 years, but we've also asked for, since $16,000 isn't going to do a lot, and we're going to have to rely on contributions. It's going to be, we're looking for matching monies for some of this marketing. So we see the money as, even at the $16,000 or even at the $100,000 level, we see it as really seed money that can be used to underwrite various marketing endeavors that are going on within the community. So we see this money as having a multiplier effect rather than just 100% of it being used like for ads in the New York Times, which wouldn't get us very far.
Right.
So, but for instance, there's a lot of marketing energy going on around the community right now. The Hills Are Alive is a good example of that. That's going to be where the arts community of Manchester, Dorset, Weston have combined their resources for a 1-week arts program. Well, let's project this out 2 or 3 or 4 years from now. It may not necessarily be this program, but as an example. So it now needs support. It's working, but it really needs a big pop. So we might have discretionary income from this marketing budget to help the Arts Center and help the Manchester Music Festival with a program like this. So, and there's a whole host of things that are really possible if we just have our antenna up
Right.
about that and then judiciously apply that money for that purpose.
All right. Well, Ron, we're going to come back to you in just a minute, but first, now at this point, I'd like to turn to you, Pauline, and let you talk a little bit about what the town has already been doing up to this point. That probably ties in a lot with what Ron has been talking about here. I know the town has been very active in doing things like replacing garbage cans and installing Wi-Fi on Main Street and a few other things like that. You know, cleaning up Adams Park would be another initiative. And you also had a big success last year by luring the mattress maker from Hoosick Falls, WCW, to the former building where Applejack used to be, and the Moore Wallace computer place was before that. How does what Ron is doing how does that tie into what the town's economic development efforts
Let me
are
go
all
back a
about?
little bit.
Okay.
We started out about 2 years ago saying, well, the town's got to get involved to do something to help grow the town, because we were all beginning to notice that it needed help. And
Empty stores.
empty stores, yes. And being an assessor, I realized that if we're going to bring people into town, we've got to bring jobs that allow people to be able to live here. And Manchester's not the cheapest place to live. So we realized that we'd have to try and bring maybe high-tech jobs or small manufacturing. And after working at that a little while, we also realized that that was going to take a long time to do. And in the interim, we went out to talk to all of the businesses and said, why did you come here? What do you like about Manchester? What works? What doesn't work? What would you like to see happen? And how could we help your business grow? And as Ron said, that's when we went to the chamber and said, can you help us start SCORE? Because there are businesses that need to talk to somebody.
Now, is SCORE, that acronym stands for what? Something about retired executives, I believe.
Senior
Senior core
Corps
of retired.
executives.
Which are basically retired executives that still want to kind of be involved and have a lot of expertise and knowledge and
Well,
can
it sort of
contribute
goes
that.
beyond retired. And we have a very large community of retired people who have a lot of knowledge and a lot of time. So we're trying to tap some of them to see if they could help businesses. We don't give advice to businesses on what to do. SCORE basically walks you through the process, and you have to make your decisions. But that was just one initiative that we did. And the chamber was really helpful in launching that for us. And we've had, I guess the last 2 years since Berta's come aboard, a very close relationship with the chamber, because the town realizes we have one side of the equation and the chamber has the other side. They really market the businesses, whereas we're trying to make an environment in which businesses want to come and in which businesses want to grow. And one of the things everybody we visited said, we've come here for a quality of life. This town has a magical quality of life that people like.
Well, what specifically do they like about it? Is it outdoor recreation? Is it art? Is it shopping?
They like all of these things. We have good schools for their children. We have recreation and good sports programs for the kids. But on the other hand, we have all the outdoor sports. We have skiing, we have hiking, we have kayaking. So whatever you're into, we seem to have the ability for you to do it. But besides recreation, we also have, and we found a community of business people who work with each other, who are willing to help each other. This is a great community. And I think it just takes some help on our part to get people working together. The town has done a lot of the hardscape, I guess. We've done, as you said, we've done the garbage cans, the
Wi-Fi,
making
all that,
it
yeah.
a much more attractive place to come and do
And let us
business.
not forget the roundabout about to
That's not, well,
finally
that's
unroll.
sort of a question whether the businesses are going to love that at the moment or not.
But I guess that would tie into
In the
that
long
idea,
run, though, I
Yeah.
think it's just a great thing for
Right.
Manchester. And at the same time, we're going to be doing the pool house. The library is looking to rebuild in town. there's a lot of vitality going on in this town.
Well, when you go out to speak to businesses that may or may not have sort of given you an idea that they'd like to move to Manchester, like WCW did, I mean, what are some of the pluses and minuses that you go through with Manchester? I mean, is there? I know you may not want to talk about the minuses, but I mean, do
Minuses,
you have to like say things like, well, if you come and move your business here and create 20 jobs, we'll give you a tax credit or
no,
some kind of incentive of one kind or another? Or is
Manchester
that
does none of that. With WCW, the state stepped in and has given the mattress company a good amount of money. What the town has done is we proved to WCW that with all the incentives they were going to get in Massachusetts, we weren't giving them any incentives and they were still going to be paying less tax here than they would have in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
And we think we have the world's worst tax, but we don't. Um, so it takes some work to show people that, yeah, it's tough, but it's tougher elsewhere.
Hmm.
So that
Now,
was an interesting exercise.
I'd like to follow up
yeah.
on Pauline's comments about, you asked about quality of life issues and, all the things that we have. The fact that we are the urban center of the Northshire, the northern part of Bennington County, not only do we have all of these great assets and this great energy, we also have, you know, what town of 4,300 has 5 banks and 7 or 8,
41 restaurants.
yeah, and 7 or 8, financial services offices and the breadth of legal services and medical services, I mean, the outlying communities, like Dorset, part of what makes Dorset great for Dorset is they're 6 miles away to come to Manchester and all their services are here.
Where do they shop?
Right.
Manchester.
So it's so because of that, because this is what makes it such an attractive place to be. It's not only those assets that the visitor is looking for, but it's also those assets that makes a visitor want to live here on a full-time basis and bring their business here.
So, and this may be a question both of you may wish to respond to. I mean, to what extent, when you talk about marketing Manchester, are we talking about marketing Manchester per se, Manchester proper, versus the surrounding areas? I mean, I'm assuming one of the lures to somebody who wants to move to Manchester is the fact that you have Stratton nearby, or Bromley, you have, the Battenkill, you have the Dorset Theatre Festival, the Weston Theatre Festival. I mean, does that all kind of play into the general pitch, or are you really focused more on the town itself?
Well, from a marketing initiative, if we look at it, let's compare it to like my personal business, or let's say Stratton is a business. So what Stratton does, they market Stratton. What Mother Merrick's does, it markets Mother Merrick's. It sells chocolate Easter bunnies and butter crunch, all of those things. Okay, but so here's the town giving setting aside a portion of their budget for marketing. So we're going to treat the marketing initiative as Manchester as a business entity, and market it that way. So it's going to be a Manchester-centric campaign, just like, we're not going to put it in our radio ads or our newspaper ads. We're not going to put in somebody who's got a candy business in Buffalo, New York, or 10 miles away.
Right.
That's for them to do.
Yeah.
Well, that's how we're approaching this with Manchester. Now, we don't live in a little fishbowl here. That we're not isolated. It's all an integrated whole. So all of these other assets come into play in the broader scheme of things. So when we talk about the arts, we are talking about Manchester's arts, but 6 miles one way and 8, 10 miles another way, there are other options that add to the quality of life for all of us. So I think that those will be implied in our marketing, but it'll be a Manchester focused. And because when people go to these places, they're not just going to the Dorset Theatre Festival for theater. If they're here for a week or for a season, they're coming to Manchester. They're enjoying our restaurants. They're going to the Manchester Music Festival. They're going to the concerts on the Green on Tuesday nights that the Chamber puts on. It all is part of this mix.
But
So,
we specifically are looking to move businesses into Manchester.
Hmm.
And this is the business hub of this area. I mean, we do have the most businesses. We're now running a campaign called business in Manchester like nowhere else.
Okay.
And what we've done is we've gotten people who have moved their businesses here to talk about why they've moved them here and why they like being here. But at the same time, we've talked about the lifestyle and the opportunities in the area. Um,
And to
because we,
underscore that, um, if that's only a snapshot of what's gone on in the recent past,
right,
all right? Think of all of us who have come from away and brought our businesses here or started a business here. So you've got a history that goes back generations of people coming from somewhere else. So even those fourth and fifth generation businesses at some point came from away at one time.
Right.
You know, and how did they get here? They came here because they stayed at the equinox in the 1890s or the
Right.
1920s, you know, and all of a sudden and maybe their kids loved it so, the experience of Manchester so much that they're the ones that are living here today and started a business or set up their law practice or whatever.
Right.
You
Right.
know, so it's really much more than just a snapshot of what's going on now. And the goal that Pauline has and what we want to support is the amplification of that so that we can perpetuate that for years to come for the next generation of business owners and residents alike.
and we found many business owners who want their kids leave when they get out of college, and they should. They should go out and see the world. But when they start raising families, the kids want to come back to Manchester. And we want to make it an environment in which there are businesses for them to come back to or businesses that they can start. So we want people to think about, okay, this is a great place to live. It's also a great place to do business.
Are there certain types of businesses that you think are more appropriate for Manchester than others? I mean, when you sort of go through, when you look at websites or you go down the list, or you think,
We're not
oh,
going
well,
to
this would
have
be a good,
hard manufacturing.
right?
We'll do light manufacturing,
No
but I
steel
think,
mills at the junction or anything like
and
that?
no steel mills in the junction.
Okay.
We think more of high-tech
Right.
companies. We think of service-type companies that make things to sell here in a small manufacturing way.
One of the issues that, you know, Pauline's alluding to too, and your question is, what is the profile of Manchester? I mean, we are a low density. I mean, I mentioned we're 4,300 people, so you're not going to get those companies that want to have 200 employees, 300 employees. It may
It may
grow into
come.
that
It may
organically.
come.
All right, and the bedroom communities, not only of Manchester but all the surrounding communities, would benefit from that as well. But it may start with a software company with 8 or 10 employees that all of a sudden grows to that 40 or 50 or 60 over the next 10 or 15 years.
It's
And
like Ben Weiss, who started AI Squared here.
right, a good example of
Yeah,
that.
and the company grew and he eventually sold it, but it's still here, and they've got a lot of high-tech employees. But also, we've done a lot with zoning. I think marrying all of the different elements of the town together has helped us figure out much more what the town needs. Because some of the issues we had was zoning. Do we have zoning for businesses to come here?
And do we at this point have the
I
right
think we
type of
do.
zoning?
I think the zoning board has done a really good job in redefining some of the areas, allowing for larger enterprises. And I think they're open if, we come up with good ideas, why we need.
That's a really key point that because zoning, zoning's only been around since 1970, the town of Manchester. And, and zoning has to be looked at as an organic process rather than a static process. And where we get trapped as individuals and within the community is thinking that just because something is this way today, that this is the way it should be forever and ever.
Right.
And that gets communities into more trouble than if they are more proactive and organic about maintaining their values, but knowing how to shape shape the zoning bylaws, if you will, in this example, to maintain those values, but also to accommodate changes that always come.
One last question to both of you before we run out of time here. How will you measure success? What are the metrics or what are the benchmarks you're going to be using to say, like for instance, in your case, Ron, next year or later this year when you go back before the select board and say, well, we did this, we did this, we did this, therefore we should have more money or whatever.
Right.
How will you evaluate how successful that's been? And
Well,
I'll throw the same question to you.
I
and
think
I'll-
measurement is a really pretty key thing to any program like this, whether it's Pauline's work or our work in conjunction with her. Obviously, first of all, measurement, you need time to develop measurements, and you need time to establish, especially with marketing. You can't just go out and spend money today and then expect a result instantly. Marketing is a long-term proposition, and we should be in this for the long haul. So I've suggested in our program that we start doing measurements 3 years out. And those measurements could be as simple as local option tax revenue changes. Has the local option tax revenue improved in the last 3 years? Has it improved relative to the overall performance of the state? That would be an interesting measurement. I mean, if we grow 4% where the state is only growing 3%, then we would say it's worked. Yeah. There are a whole host of measurements as well. I mean, occupancy rates in our lodging establishments, patronage in stores and in restaurants. Okay. For instance, instead of measuring dollars, measure people. So if the occupancy rate is X and 3 years from now it's X plus a certain factor, that would be a form of measurement. Flow of funds to our local banks is another measurement. Okay. So there are several things that I think can be employed. In fact, I think that the town of Manchester, in cooperation with the chamber and maybe even a couple of the local schools, should develop a business barometer, like an index.
All right, a little thermometer out there.
Exactly.
How we're doing.
So on the economic development front then, Pauline, how do you assess whether or not what you're doing is working well or needs to be tweaked here or there?
Ours is a little bit harder to measure.
Yeah, that must be far more. You don't have this same. I think. Well, this week we got more money in local option tax revenue coming through town, or something like that. Not quite like that at all.
I don't know how we're going to measure that. And I think it's a cooperative effort. If it all goes up, then we're all doing our job. And if it doesn't go up, then we're probably none of us are probably doing our job.
Well, I'm sure you're both doing your jobs very well, and I want to thank you both for making the time to come down and talk with us today, and to the viewers to keep us all up to date on what's going on. And a question I'm sure we're all very interested in, and we'll be hearing more about as we go forward in the weeks and months ahead.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, and we'll come back and tell you how successful.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, 6 months from now we'll have you back, and we'll pick up where we left off.
Great.
Great.
Okay. And thank all of you for watching today. You've been watching The Front Page here on GNet TV. My name's Andrew McKeever, Managing Editor of the Manchester Journal. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again the next time.